Hi, everybody. It's Lawyer Autumn White-Boyd here. Excuse me, a frog in my throat. I'm excited to be back here with you today with our Facebook Live and podcast episode. This is the second in our series of making sure that your business is totally ready for your next launch. We are coming up on Black Friday. We've got maybe holiday promotions coming up, New Year's sales coming up. So we're doing 3 episodes in a row. Last week, we talked about making sure that you were ready for Facebook ads to promote any new upcoming offers or launches that you've got. This week, we're talking about making sure that your testimonials, any endorsements or earnings promises, that you are in compliance with all of the rules around that. This is something that I feel like is not talked about in online business enough. And actually, we just had one of our larger clients come to us in the middle of a launch and say that someone had brought to her attention that she might be out of compliance with these rules, which are Federal Trade Commission rules. There's laws and regulations in the United States that are all under the umbrella of the Federal Trade Commission. And so our client was a little worried. So we had to jump in right in the middle of the launch and review everything. The good news is there was nothing crazy. We were able to make a couple of small tweaks, and that is going to be the case for most of you. I think as you're listening or watching this, you may find some areas that you need to do some tweaking in, but hopefully you are not in any of the areas that are really going to get you in trouble. I just realized I never plugged in my microphone. So let's set up, and hopefully that'll improve our sound a little bit. Okay, I'm going to give my standard disclaimer, which is I'm Autumn White-Boyd. I am a lawyer. I'm licensed to practice law in Tennessee, but nothing in this episode should be legal advice. This is really an area where if your business is large enough that you are concerned about maybe violating some of these rules and coming to the FTC's attention, you need to be working with a lawyer one-on-one to review your sales pages, review your marketing materials, make sure that you are on the right side of all these regulations. It is not an area to mess with. So these laws that I'm going to be talking about, they apply to U.S. businesses or any business that is advertising to U.S. customers. So if you're watching this, my guess is you fall, or listening to this, you fall in one of those categories. And what are these laws? So these are not really any special laws to digital marketers or to online businesses, online course businesses or coaches. These are the same consumer protection laws that apply to any commercial activity, so any kind of business activity. They all apply to online business. And so that's going to include your business if you're doing social media marketing, mobile advertising, text message marketing. All of these normal rules that I'm going to talk about today all apply to your business. And where this all comes from is the Federal Trade Commission Act's prohibitions, that means it's not allowed, on unfair or deceptive acts or practices. It's very broad, and there are lots of regulations kind of spelling out what exactly falls into that, but it's going to include your online advertising, marketing, and online sales. So why do we care about this? Why does it matter for our online business? And the reason is there are incredibly severe penalties if you mess this up and you come to the FTC's attention. I'm going to give you an example, and this is an extreme example, and I will say I don't want to downplay all of the things that I'm about to talk about. They're important, but I do want to let you know that if you are violating some of these rules, it will probably not play out with you being hauled into court for hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. That's not the starting point. It usually starts with you get an enforcement letter, and so the FTC will tell you in no uncertain terms what you have done wrong, and they will ask you to fix it. Now, if you've been doing really, really terrible things, like some of the things I'm about to tell you about in my example, they may not be so nice about it. But typically, if it looks like it just could have been a good faith error or things that you can fix easily, there may be some penalties, but it's not going to start out with these hundreds of millions of dollars of fines. But I do want to give you an example from the online world because I think it's important. This is not just, people trying to sell snake oil or weight loss powders that don't really work. This has happened with online education. So this settlement just came out September of 2020. So this is fresh off the presses. You may not have heard of this company. I had not. It's called Online Trading Academy. It made megabucks promises for its investment training programs. They were trying to teach people how to trade on the stock market. So OTA claimed that anyone could learn to use its strategy, and it filled its sales pitches with testimonials. So I hope this is ringing some bells for you because a lot of us in the online world are using testimonials in our marketing. It filled its sales pitch with testimonials and hypothetical trades showing significant profits. But OTA had no actual evidence that purchasers were likely to actually make those profits that they were advertising. And the company's own surveys and third-party trading data showed that most of its customers made little to no money. So we've got claims over here and we've got actual data that are totally contradictory. That's a problem. When consumers realized the truth, that this program was garbage, and asked for their money back, OTA had illegally put terms in its contracts that did not allow customers to tell the government or other consumers about the deception. So their contracts basically prohibited them, it was like a gag order, from making reports to the Federal Trade Commission or other consumer protection agencies. So an FTA representative said about this, OTA had no support for its lavish earnings claims, and that's illegal. So that's what I want to focus on today is what kind of claims are you making in your marketing, either through actually telling people that they're going to achieve certain results or by using testimonials or endorsements to give the impression that other people will be able to have the same results as the people who are providing the endorsements are having. We want to be really careful around that. So you're going to see me, if you're watching on video, I'm going to put on my glasses because this is kind of a meaty episode and I've got a lot to get through. So stay tuned. I promise it is not going to be dry and boring. We're going to keep it lively. But before I move on from our online training academy example, I want to tell you what they ended up settling for. So typically with a settlement, this is an agreement between the government and the other parties. So this is probably not as much as the government could have gotten if they'd gone to trial, but they settled. So they got a monetary judgment of $362 million. That is an enormous judgment, especially considering it's a settlement, so that's likely less than the government actually could have gotten if they had gone to trial. It was partially suspended due to the defendant's inability to pay. But a single defendant, so one guy who was involved in this scheme, had to pay $8.3 million in fines. That's him individually. This is not just the company. This is him individually. $8.3 million in fines, plus he had to surrender his Cessna airplane, his Bentley, his Escalade, his motorhome, and 6 minivans. So he took a pretty big hit. This was all to fund consumer refunds. So I think if you listen to that example, there's some things that hopefully you are not doing in your business. Like they also, the company had actually loaned money to a lot of the purchasers. I think most of our online business, we are not actually loaning money. We are just accepting payment from our students. We are not, actively deceiving our customers with claims that are factually untrue. We are not preventing people from reporting claims to the government, hopefully. But I give this to you as an example. This is not out of the realm for an online business to get into these issues. All right, so let's start by talking about endorsements or testimonials. How should we be using these in our marketing sales efforts? So the FTC treats endorsements and testimonials the same. They're a little bit different. An endorsement is like if a celebrity or a person says, I think this program is great, you should buy it. A testimonial is more, I'm telling you about my experience with the program. So they're both really similar, so the FTC treats them as the same. They're slightly different, but I'm going to talk about testimonials because that's mostly how they're used in online business rather than getting a celebrity endorsement. But so there's 3 key things to remember with endorsements or testimonials. They cannot be misleading. They cannot be untruthful. The flip side of that is they have to be truthful. They cannot be deceptive. So we're going to go into a lot of the ways that we could violate those. And there may be some surprises here, so I want you to listen because as I was reading through these, I was recognizing a lot of what I see in online marketing. So here's the kind of umbrella rule is that a business or a company has the obligation under these FTC regulations to provide honest opinions and experiences. And so the endorser or the testimonial person has to also be truthful and honest. So they can't lie to you, or if they lie to you, you can't use that. So if a business is presenting untruthful opinions, that is misleading to a consumer because it's a lie, and that will ultimately appear deceptive. So here are a couple of things to keep in mind. Number 1, if someone who is endorsing or giving you a testimonial was paid to do so, you have to disclose that. And that includes if you gave them free access to your course or your program or your product in exchange for them giving you a testimonial, that's payment. That is something of value. So you have to disclose that where you're sharing their testimonial. That's really important. And this applies, there's different categories of endorsers, and we'll go through some specific requirements for specific kinds of endorsers and testimonial providers. But this one applies across the board. If you either pay someone, it could be a celebrity, it could be a scientist, it could be Mary Jane down the block, you gave her a free copy of your diet to try and because you wanted to get a testimonial, that's fine, but you have to disclose it. You have to tell people if someone has either been paid or did not have to pay. Basically, they received it for free. Has to be disclosed. All right, there's special rules if your endorser is an expert. So this would be like a doctor giving an opinion about a diet or a supplement, or maybe a mental health professional giving an expert opinion or endorsement of a life coaching program. Anytime you see someone that you think could be an expert, and here's how the FTC defines that. That's an individual who has knowledge of a particular subject that is greater than normally found in ordinary individuals. So kind of a low bar for an expert. Anytime you have some sort of expert, you have to go through an extra step if you're using their endorsement or a testimonial. They have to really have sufficient qualifications. So you can't have somebody that you're calling Dr. So-and-so and he's in the white jacket giving his opinion about your nutritional supplement, and it turns out he has a doctorate in Latin or something totally unrelated, but you're kind of holding him out as if he's a medical doctor. We can't do that. They have to have sufficient qualifications to be giving the opinion that they're stating in their endorsement or their testimonial. The second factor is they have to, whatever they're saying, their opinion or their testimonial, their endorsement, has to be supported by an actual evaluation, examination, or testing of the product that other experts in the field normally would conduct to support whatever they're saying in their endorsement. So if, again, I'm just gonna use nutritional supplements because it's easy. Let's say you have, a 8-week diet program that's an online course. If you have, a bariatric doctor or a weight loss doctor giving an opinion, they would have to actually do some testing or do some review of the program the same way that any other expert in the field normally would when they're evaluating whether it's effective or whether, it supports the opinion that the doctor is giving. So you can't just haul in a guy off the street, throw a costume on him so he looks like an expert and he hasn't ever tried or gone through the program. That is all things that are going to be a problem. Sufficient qualifications if you have an expert, and they have to actually, do an evaluation of the thing, similar to what a normal expert would in the field. All right, let's talk about celebrity endorsements. We don't see this as much in the online world. I think when you think of a celebrity, you think of like a movie star. But there are certainly some well-known people in the online space who might be considered celebrities. So the endorsement, the rule for celebrities, of course, if they've been paid, this is the rule for anybody, that's the rule for experts too. If they've been paid, you have to tell that, or if they've gotten the product for free. But there's two other rules. The endorsement has to reflect the celebrity's honest experience or opinion. So you can't just hand them a script and have them read it unless they helped you write it. It has to be their honest experience or opinion. And this is the kicker. If the endorsement says that the celebrity used the product or service, if they say, I went through the diet and I lost 25 pounds, they have to have actually done that. Or I used this hair cream and my hair was so bouncy and beautiful. In the online world, I think it would be more, I went through this program and I achieved XYZ results. They have to have actually done that. Again, it has to be honest. They can't just make stuff up. You can't make stuff up and ask them to say it. There are some strict rules around that. Okay. Overall, just general rules about endorsements or testimonials. They have to be substantiated, which means in the FTC's world, this means that the endorsement or the testimonial has to be accurate, and it also has to be typical of an ordinary consumer's experience. So this is where we get into, using your number one student's testimonial that they had XYZ success going through your program, but 99% of your other students did not. You can't just cherry pick that one rock star student. It has to be accurate and typical of an ordinary consumer's experience. If it's not, there's ways we can use disclaimers. There's ways that we can get around that, but it's going to be cumbersome. You're not really going to like it. I'll go into that in a minute. The ideal thing to do is to find that middle of the road It doesn't have to be a mathematical average. So you don't have to say, okay, well, this guy lost 20 pounds, this guy lost 5 pounds, this guy lost 7. You don't have to take all of them and find like the one magical unicorn who's the exact average number, but it has to be basically typical. So you are going to have evidence to back up testimonials or endorsements if it's something that would be scientific. So this would be like, again, I keep coming back to dietary supplements because that's what I think of when I think about these, kind of scientific claims. Any kind of, if you're doing CBD or other things where you're trying to make claims about results in that way, you're going to have reliable scientific evidence. You cannot just be making these claims kind of anecdotally. So claims based on consumer experiences are not good enough. Anecdotal evidence is not good enough if it is in that kind of scientific realm. If you have an atypical student, a rockstar student whose testimonial you want to use, again, I'll get to that in a minute of how you can do that. And I don't think you're going to like it. So let's try and find our middle of the road, students who are achieving average results, typical results. That's who we want to be featuring. With weight loss, this is a particular issue. If you are using before and after pictures or using the exact amounts of weight that people have lost, if Sally Jane says she lost X pounds using, 15 pounds using the product, you have to have evidence in your files that that result is typical. So that means if you are using weight loss results, you need to be capturing that data. You need to be tracking. Because if the FTC comes knocking, they're going to want to see your records. How do you know that's typical? Again, unless you're using a disclaimer, but even if you've got a disclaimer, you're going to have to tell what's typical. So when we get to that, we'll talk about that in a minute. So again, you got to be tracking it and it's got to be typical. With taste tests, this is interesting. Not really relevant to most online businesses, but I found this interesting. If a consumer says that he or she prefers the taste of, for example, drink A over drink B, you have to actually have evidence that consumers generally prefer the taste of drink A over drink B. So this is why when we see these commercials with taste tests, you might see disclaimers flashing across the bottom of the screen, or you may hear an announcer saying something like, we tested 100 people and 75 said they preferred drink A and 25 said they preferred drink B. You've got to really have those numbers. Again, this can't just be anecdotal. If you are making a claim like this, you've got to have the proof to back it up. All right. Let's talk about disclaimers. This is next. So I think a lot of us think, there's all these rules about endorsements and testimonials, but I'll just stick a disclaimer on it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. And to a certain extent you can, but there are limits. So I think what we see a lot of time are vague disclaimers like results may vary or not all customers will get these results. Those are not good enough. You're going to have to get a lot more granular, a lot more specific if you want to comply with the FTC rules. So here's an example that the FTC gave. So let's say you're making, you're selling a course that says people will earn a certain amount of money. You would have to say something like a typical user of this course or a typical student in this course makes X amount of dollars in X amount of months. You got to be really specific. And again, it's got to be typical. It doesn't have to be an exact average, but you have to find what is a typical user doing, which again means you have to be tracking. If you want to make these claims and then use a disclaimer, you have to have the facts to back them up. So this has to be proven. It has to be substantiated. So here's how we get to how specific we need to be. The FTC uses the term generally expected results rather than average. So again, you don't have to calculate a mathematical average, but you do need to have some sort of reliable measure of the results a typical user might expect. So again, we need to be tracking our results if we want to use testimonials or endorsements. So the FTC gave this example with a weight loss program. So an advertisement for a weight loss supplement features a before and after photo of a woman, and she says she lost 20 pounds in 8 weeks using the program. So there's an asterisk next to it, and it says, there's a disclaimer in very fine print at the bottom of the page that says results may vary. That is not going to cut it. So what the FTC says is, yes, the experience of this woman is accurately represented, assuming this is true. You need to be sure it's true. We shouldn't be making stuff up with pictures. But the separate competent research looking at how the supplement works showed an average weight loss of only 6 pounds in 8 weeks. So she said she lost 20, but the average is only 6. So your disclosure or your disclaimer at the bottom, or really should be nearer to the poster, to the image, it shouldn't be buried. It is not adequate. You can't just say results vary, or what did they say? Yeah, they said results may vary. What you need to say is these results are not typical. I know, I said you weren't going to like it. I'm telling you. So you have to say it has to be an equal print size to whatever other text you've got. You can't vary it in the fine print. These results are not typical. Average weight loss achieved in a clinical study was 6 pounds. So this is why, I mean, if you see the example and then you see this disclaimer, it doesn't feel good. Your customer is going to see that it's kind of a bait and switch. You're holding out this superstar, but here's your average. And again, because again, you can't put it in fine print. It can't be hidden. You can't link to it on another page. It has to be right there. So I think, I'm just generally all for not using shady marketing tactics in general. So I think this is a good thing. I think we should all be upfront and honest about what results our programs are getting anyway. And this just falls in line with that. So I think that you're going to save yourself a lot of type if you just use the average or the typical rather than trying to find these outliers. All right, here's another example that I came up with. This is my own hypothetical. This is not FTC endorsed. But I was thinking about some other examples. So I thought about maybe a program that is sleep training for babies. Thank goodness my babies are big enough. We're not sleep training them anymore, but there were certainly days when I would have paid any amount of money to someone who would promise me that my twin babies would actually sleep. So let's say hypothetically you have a sales page and it's entirely testimonials from satisfied customers saying that after they bought the training, their baby slept for 6 hours straight. I would have, again, paid $1 million for that back in 2011 when I had twin infants. So kind of pinging off of some of the FTC language. So this ad, it's got a bunch of testimonials and it says, after they bought the training, their baby slept 6 hours straight. So this is going to communicate that their endorsers' experiences are representative of what other users could expect. So even if you have a disclaimer such as, and again, I wrote this, not the FTC, these testimonials do not prove our product works, you should not expect to have similar results. It's still deceptive. That's not good enough. Unless you have adequate substantiation that new users will typically receive results. So here are some ways, again, this is my opinion, this is not the FTC, of how you might be able to fix it. So 2 scenarios. Let's say you've done the studies, you have followed up with your students and you have checked back with them to say, how's your baby sleeping? And you've tracked like week by week and you've gotten data on what exactly they did to achieve that result. So if you have found, you've got the data to back it up in your files, and you have found that your customers can generally expect to achieve that result, then that ad should very clearly and conspicuously disclose what circumstances led to those results. So was it just completing the program, or did they have to do other specific things? So examples would be they rocked their baby for an hour every night, they gave them a warm bath, they did a 30-minute special massage, they used a special piece of equipment, whatever. If there were special circumstances outside of just completing your course, you've got to include that. Because all you're selling is the course. If there is effort or equipment or other things that are required to achieve this result, then you've got to disclose that. And again, you have to have substantiation. So if you're saying, all these parents who did all these things got the 6 hours straight of sleep, you got to have records in your file showing that. You can't just have these 5 people who reported fantastic results. Now, if, as I would kind of suspect, your customers don't generally achieve that result, or typically, or average, however you want to say it, then your ad has to clearly and conspicuously disclose what they can expect to achieve. So an example of this would be most parents who complete this course see an increase in sleep of 1 hour each night. If all you're doing is completing the course, what are they seeing? Without all these other hoops and things that they're jumping through. Okay, so those are just some examples. So let's move on to another area. Now, I've talked about this a lot, and I think a lot of people are aware of this, that if you have a material connection to one of your endorsers or someone who's giving a testimonial, you have to disclose that as well. So that's like if your daughter is the one giving a testimonial, or an employee, or someone who's a relative of the business owner or something like that. Obviously, we think that might affect their opinion of the product, so we have to disclose that. And then, of course, reminder, any payment or free product has to be disclosed. It's absolutely required. And now, this is one I think we've heard about more because you see like hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored a fair bit on social media. I think some of these other more kind of intricate things when it gets to your sales pages and your actual, maybe your sales emails that you're sending are a little more tricky. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is earnings disclaimers. Now, we talked a little bit about some other disclosures or disclaimers that you might include if you are using testimonials or examples of people's success. But the earnings disclaimer is really important if you are in the what's sometimes called B2C or B2E. If you are teaching people how to sell or market or do things that you are saying are going to improve their business, you need to, I would strongly encourage you. It's not exactly required by the FTC, but I think it is one of the easier ways to comply with a lot of these regulations is to add a separate earnings disclaimers page to your website and to link it in your footer and in lots of other places. We'll talk about where you might want to put it. So there are 4 essential components. And again, this is just to comply with all the stuff I was talking about earlier about making sure the results are typical, making sure they're backed up by proof, all of those things. That still applies. So your earnings disclaimer is not going to do away with all of that stuff. It's just going to kind of help you make it clear that you're complying with all of that. So the point of your earnings disclaimer is to avoid any impression of a get-rich-quick scheme. With the example I gave of the online training academy, I think that's what it was called, that just settled with the FTC, online training academy, for millions and millions of dollars and all of their vehicles. That was a get-rich-quick scheme. They were promising these outrageous results, way better than most people could achieve on their own. That's what you want to avoid. And I know that's how we get people to invest in our programs, but it is not a great idea. So if you want to stay on the right side of the FTC. So let's look. 4 essential components to include if you're going to write an earnings disclaimer page. 1, earnings are estimates, not guarantees. Now, when we write terms and conditions for websites or contracts for online course creators with their students, these are things that we are always including. But it's important to also make it just really extra clear that if you are talking about other students' earnings or even your own earnings after using certain tactics or ideas, you need to make it really clear that those are estimates or examples. They are not guaranteed. Second, kind of on the same line, results are not guaranteed. So you really can't guarantee anything. You're basically saying, I'm going to teach you some things, but I'm not guaranteeing that you're actually going to get these results. Number 3, past successes may not occur again. So I think we all know, having an amazing launch or a really successful month, there's a lot that goes into that, and it's not all in your control. It's sometimes outside forces or a current event or how the economy is performing or sudden interest in an issue that can spur on amazing results that may have nothing to do with the particular marketing tactics or whatever are in this program. So giving a disclaimer that just because someone has had success in the past, it may not occur again. And then the last one, and this is really important, and I think we don't say this enough in the online marketing world, is that users must make an effort. That this is not you sign up and you take this course and magical unicorns appear and deposit money in your bank account. You have to do some work to get any results. And so your success is largely going to be based on your own effort. That needs to be really clear. So those are our 4 key elements of an earnings disclaimer. Now let's talk about where it needs to be. It needs to be clear and conspicuous. That's the FTC's favorite language. So I think they would like it to be in flashing lights with neon, but it can't be hidden. If you want this to be effective to kind of counterbalance any earnings claims that you're making or testimonials that talk about earnings, you need to make it conspicuous. You cannot. Ideally, if you've got a testimonial, that earnings disclaimer is going to be really nearby, maybe even linked right under each testimonial. The consumer really shouldn't have to scroll down the page to find it. I know a lot of us, I'm guilty of this myself, use very long sales pages with lots of copy. They shouldn't have to scroll down all the way to find it. It should be really easy and clear. It should not solely be buried in your website terms and conditions. You can put it in your website terms and conditions, but again, if you're using a lot of earnings language in your testimonials or in your marketing, talking about past results, it can't just be buried in your website terms and conditions. Ideally, as I mentioned, this can be a separate plain language document that you can link to, a separate page on your website. 3 places I would also consider posting it would be in your website footer. So like, a lot of us have privacy policy terms and conditions. It can be right there, earnings disclaimer. It should be linked on your sales checkout page. I think that's a new one for probably a lot of us. And then, as I mentioned, it should be linked next to any testimonial that mentions earnings or results in a kind of business sense, business success. Now, you don't have to have this whole earnings disclaimer page, not necessary if your disclaimer can be very brief and short. I find this is not usually the case with earnings, though. An example would be if you were selling a weight loss product and your disclosure of the typical weight loss is 5 pounds a week. So I guess, if your typical earnings is $10,000, that would be one example. But my guess is there's going to be more that goes into that than just that typical, is X dollars. Especially if you are using testimonials that include things like, I got time back on my calendar, or I had less stress, I wasn't so worried, all those kinds of things. Hard to do an earnings disclaimer that's going to include all of that in one little sentence that you might not need on a separate page. I'm going to just mention, if you want to learn more about this, I've really just scratched the surface. I'm going to give my disclaimer again. This is not meant to be your end-all be-all about your using testimonials and endorsements and complying with the FTC rules. I've just scratched the surface. So if you want to learn more, I'm going to link to the FTC, some resources from the FTC. They have a document called the .com Disclosures Guide. They also have separate guides about testimonials and endorsements that are really helpful. We'll link to all of those in the show notes. Let us know if you have any questions. This is the kind of thing that we work on with our online course clients to make sure, like I said at the beginning, that they are doing this the right way, because there can be really, really stiff penalties. And I know some of us feel like the online world is, we're all cowboys and we don't have to follow the rules and there's no regulation. It's just not true. There are rules and regulations, and we want to make sure that we're following them, or there could be incredibly stiff penalties. So to end on a high note, I'm excited. Next week, we're going to do installment 3 of our series on getting ready for your launch. We're going to be talking about brushing off your contracts before you head into that next launch. So that might be your terms of use if you're selling a course. It might be if you're doing a digital product, also terms of use. If you're promoting your services, it might be your client contract. So we're going to be looking at all of those and what you need to do to make sure that you have a really successful launch that does not end up costing you big time because your contracts are not actually saying the things that you want them to say. So I hope you'll join me then. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you again soon.